Second, Ridge Ministries presents a talk on illegal immigration, fairness, fraud, and the fight for justice. Who profits from undocumented labor? The truth about undocumented workers, taxes, and the case for fair treatment.
Hello and thank you all for joining us on this very important podcast as we break away from our traditional teachings and lessons and take a close look at one of the greatest injustices of all time being committed here in our very nation by our very own government. Today, our topic is titled, A Talk on Illegal Immigration, Fairness, Fraud, and the Fight for Justice, and we have with us a very special guest whose voice we are sure you will recognize to help us bring to light this injustice and offer us ways that we, as individuals, can help to, in some way, bring about a compassionate change. This is truly a very sensitive topic as many human lives are at stake on a daily basis. Our government here in the United States has stepped up its military might and increased the number of immigration roundups and deportations affecting mostly people whose only crime was to circumvent the existing and time-delaying system of legal immigration so that they can earn a decent wage and have a better way of life by the sweat off their brows and the pains of their backs and bodies.
It is very true. Calling them criminals, as the government has done, is indeed a bit of a stretch. Yes, they came in via illegal means. They did not apply for a work visa nor did they go through the often costly and painstaking legal process this country has set up for those who want to enter the states to work. However, these are human beings. People. Albeit undocumented. Their real only crime was to actually want to work, which is more than we can say for the majority of people we see on the streets begging for money or taking full advantage of the welfare system this country is so proud to offer to its citizens.
Yes, and what we do know, from those we interviewed, was that many were lured here by promises of work and many were actually given a social security number without asking for it. After all, they didn't speak our language and barely understood our laws and so they let themselves be guided by predators, really, whom took advantage of their situation, at times for their own personal gain. Many of these migrants came to work in the agricultural industries as field labor or in the construction trades as day laborers simply so that they could send money home to take care of their family members, many whom are elderly and needing of special care.
You are absolutely right. Because they did not and do not know how the labor process works here in the U.S., they relied on others to guide them and simply did what they were told to do. Yes, one could say that their being deported is their own fault for not knowing and not following the rules. However, when we really stop to think about it, whom is really at fault? I don't know about you, but the last time I had to look for a job, I had to wait until I was accepted by an employer in order to work for them. That employer had to decide whether to hire me or not, and that only after they did all of my background checks. In the end, the ones profiting the most from this undocumented labor force are not just the employers whom hire them, but the government whom takes a third of their hard-earned monies, and the rest of us, yes, people like you and me, whom get to benefit from this so-called cheap labor through our paying much less for our food and clothing thanks to their hard work.
You bring up a great point about undocumented workers and taxes. So, these people come over illegally, well, undocumented. They most likely obtained a false social security number that was given to them of which they had no clue about for the most part. And they went to work, long, hard hours, doing the type of jobs that, well, honestly, people like you and I and a huge number of human beings of all races and nations, would not give much thought of doing, if the other option was to collect unemployment or some other sort of government assistance. They just were given one so they could work, because they don't know how the process works, right? And they've used that all of their lives while they were working. Social Security was being paid. Taxes were being taken out. And now these people are getting thrown out, saying that they should have never been working in the U.S., let alone without any documentation. However, that money was rightfully earned by them, and the government now has all of that money in their pockets. What legal recourse does a person like that have, or do they have any?
That's a really thoughtful question. The issue of what happens to Social Security contributions and taxes paid by undocumented workers is complex. In most cases, when an undocumented worker uses a false or borrowed Social Security number, their payroll taxes, including Social Security and Medicare contributions, Go into what's called the Earnings Suspense File, ESF, a special account for wages that don't match any valid Social Security number. This money ultimately benefits the Social Security system but is not credited to the worker who paid into it. The Social Security Administration, SSA, does not refund these contributions, even if the person is deported. Essentially, those funds stay within the system, often helping to strengthen it.
Wait. So what you are telling me is that although the Social Security Administration does know who actually paid those contributions, and it can be confirmed with the W-2 of the person who paid those contributions, the Social Security Administration will credit those contributions to the person whom paid them. And the Social Security Administration will not refund those contributions if the person who contributed gets deported? What legal recourse do they have?
As far as any legal recourse, there is little to none. Undocumented workers cannot claim Social Security benefits, even if they've contributed for years. While some legal avenues might exist, such as challenging tax withholdings through the IRS, especially if they paid income taxes using an individual taxpayer identification number, also known as an ITIN, reclaiming Social Security contributions is generally not an option. This raises ethical and policy debates. These workers contributed to the system but won't see any return. Some argue for reforms allowing at least partial credit for contributions made under ITINs or other legal identifiers, but as of now, the government keeps those funds.
So, legally then, does a person like this have the right to ask for that money back? Because it seems to be that two wrongs are being committed. The first wrong is that the person is using a falsely obtained Social Security number so that they can work in the United States. And the United States government is taking away their money knowing full well that these people are not necessarily the people that they claim to be. And I say, knowing full well, because United States government has a system of tracking this number from the very get-go, and yet they choose to ignore it until there comes a time that somebody says something. And so that we are clear, what I mean by choosing to ignore it, is that there are systems in place currently, even today, using today's technology to go back and forth and say, hey, this doesn't look right, we need to do something about it, and actually talk to the person or talk to their employer. But nobody seems to do that.
Legally, an undocumented worker does not have the right to claim back the Social Security or Medicare contributions they made under a false or mismatched number. Even though the government is aware of these discrepancies, through systems like the Earnings Suspense File and SSA verification tools, they do not proactively intervene unless fraud or identity theft is formally investigated. You're absolutely right that the system has the capability to flag mismatches. In fact, the Social Security Administration used to send out no-match letters to employers, notifying them of discrepancies between reported earnings and valid Social Security numbers. However, enforcement was inconsistent, and these letters were largely discontinued because they often led to workers losing jobs without resolving the underlying issue. As for fairness, the ethical dilemma is clear. The government collects these funds but denies the contributors any benefit. Some argue that this is an unfair windfall for the Social Security system, while others see it as a consequence of working without legal authorization. Regardless, from a legal standpoint, once money is paid into Social Security under an invalid number, it stays in the system. The law does not allow refunds, and legal challenges to recover those funds have not been successful.
So, while the U.S. government could, in theory, be more proactive in addressing mismatches before years of contributions pile up, the current approach prioritizes enforcement after the fact, often when deportation proceedings begin. It seems to me that it actually benefits the government that they have these undocumented people working because the government makes all the money, doesn't have to pay it back, and then can throw them out at will. It's almost like when people are used against their will, it's almost slavery per se, in a way. Or maybe not necessarily slavery, but really more like financial abuse, or like elder abuse, where you just use them for the money, and then when you no longer need them, off they go.
That really is a powerful way to frame it, and it does raise serious ethical concerns. While it's not outright slavery, since these workers are technically being paid for their labor, it does resemble systemic financial exploitation in that undocumented workers contribute billions to Social Security and Medicare without any legal path to reclaim or benefit from those contributions. the government undeniably benefits from this setup. The Social Security Administration, SSA, estimates that undocumented workers contribute about $12 billion annually to Social Security through payroll taxes, yet they will never collect benefits. That money helps sustain the system for those who can legally claim benefits, making undocumented workers a hidden financial backbone of programs they are barred from using. At the same time, there seems to be a contradiction. The system tolerates their labor when it's economically beneficial but criminalizes them when it's politically convenient. Employers benefit, industries, like agriculture, construction, and service jobs, rely on them, and the government collects their taxes, but when the time comes, they are cast out with no recourse. That's why some people view this as a form of institutionalized financial abuse, a system that takes but never gives back. This is why some advocate for immigration reform that would allow at least some form of legal work authorization, so these workers aren't simply discarded after years of contributions. But as it stands, the system remains deeply unfair to those caught in it.
What can regular U.S. citizens do to turn this around? There's got to be a legal recourse, there's got to be a legal challenge, almost like a class action lawsuit against the federal government and the state government and the local government for letting this go by because each one of those has the opportunity to stop it and they have not. There's got to be a lawsuit that can be filed on behalf of all of these people to get their money back. And if getting them their money back is not an option, then at least giving them the right to continue to work. All these people have been doing is working. They're not causing problems criminally, etc., right? So ideally the best way to resolve this would be to say, hey, you are actually a pretty good person, you've been working hard all these years, you've been paying taxes, you don't have any rights to that money really, but we do appreciate you working. We're going to give you a means that you can continue to work. Just know that there's no retirement plan for you, there's no security for you except the job that you have right now or the job that you're going to get into again. But you're on your own with regards to all the other benefits because you're not a citizen.
It really would be that easy to do, and there is no valid reason why the United States government could not do something like that. You are raising an issue that has frustrated many for decades, one that blends economics, ethics, and law. A legal challenge, such as a class action lawsuit, would face significant hurdles, but it would not be impossible. There are several avenues that regular U.S. citizens and advocates could explore to address the issue of undocumented workers contributing to Social Security without benefiting from it. One option is legal action, such as a class action lawsuit or constitutional challenge. This could argue that the government is unjustly enriching itself by accepting contributions from workers who will never receive benefits, potentially violating due process or equal protection under the Constitution. Another legal angle could focus on breach of contract or unjust enrichment, as undocumented workers pay into Social Security with the belief that it is a universal program. However, courts may argue that the law is clear, and Social Security benefits are reserved for those with lawful status. Despite this, class action lawsuits have historically led to policy changes, making it worth exploring.
Would another legal avenue exist other than a class action lawsuit?
A second avenue is legislative reform, which could involve advocating for a new worker visa or permit that allows long-term undocumented workers, who have paid taxes and stayed out of legal trouble, to continue working without granting full citizenship benefits. Additionally, pushing for tax reforms that allow workers using an ITIN, individual taxpayer identification number, to access some Social Security credits or refunds could provide relief. Advocates could also push for laws that require states and local governments to notify workers when their SSN doesn't match and offer a path for correction, rather than allowing the system to exploit their labor. Finally, public awareness and political pressure can be powerful tools. Citizens can pressure lawmakers by highlighting the economic contributions of undocumented workers and the injustice of collecting billions in Social Security contributions without providing any return.
Sounds like there is a lot that can be done by all of us as citizens to support those who really have no way to support themselves with regards to this injustice that has been going on for a very long time.
You are absolutely right. We can all do something as citizens to help. Supporting worker protection organizations and advocacy groups that fight for labor rights, regardless of immigration status, is another critical strategy. Moreover, businesses and industries that rely on undocumented labor, such as agriculture, hospitality, and construction, can be encouraged to lobby for work permits, as many of these industries would suffer without the labor force they provide. The end goal of addressing this issue may not be the provision of full Social Security benefits for undocumented workers without citizenship, but there is room for compromise. One potential outcome could be the creation of a renewable work permit that allows for continued legal employment. Additionally, long-term contributors who have paid into the system for a set number of years could be eligible for a tax refund or limited benefits. Another important outcome would be greater transparency and accountability, ensuring that workers are not unknowingly paying into a system that will never recognize them. The harsh reality is that this issue persists because it benefits both the government and industries, while regular citizens, people like you and I, are often unaware, and many simply don't care, that this financial exploitation is occurring. Achieving change will require a combination of legal challenges, legislative reform, and public pressure to push for a more just system.
So, with regards to paying taxes, if they have already been paying taxes under their falsely obtained Social Security number, and they have been filing taxes at the end of every tax year using that same number, and obviously paying the difference because the government never gives back the refund, what options do they have to come clean in that aspect?
If someone has been filing taxes for years under a falsely obtained Social Security number, coming clean is complicated because it does involve things like tax fraud, identity issues, and potential criminal consequences for such actions, no matter how much of a victim they themselves were. However, there are 4 possible ways to correct the situation while minimizing risks. Number 1, speak with a tax attorney or immigration lawyer first. Before making any disclosures, they must consult a tax attorney and an immigration lawyer. A tax attorney can help navigate IRS issues, while an immigration lawyer can assess how admitting to a false SSN might affect their legal status. Number 2 is to apply for an individual taxpayer identification number, also known as an ITIN, if they have not done so already. The IRS does not check immigration status, and undocumented immigrants can file taxes using an individual taxpayer identification number, ITIN, instead of a false SSN. They can apply for an ITIN via the IRS website at www.irs.gov and, once they have an ITIN, they can begin filing taxes correctly under their real name and their own identification number. The third possible way is to file an amended tax return using their ITIN. If they want to fix past tax filings, they could file amended tax returns, IRS Form 1040X, using their correct ITIN. Although the IRS generally accepts corrections if taxes were paid correctly, filing an amendment could raise red flags about their use of a false SSN. An attorney can advise whether this is worth the risk or if they should simply start filing correctly going forward. The fourth possible way is to notify the Social Security Administration. There is a lot of risk involved here, so we suggest that they speak to an immigration attorney first. However, if they are on a path to legalization, such as through marriage, employment sponsorship, or another visa, they may need to correct their SSA records. However, the SSA could flag them for identity fraud and potentially refer the case to immigration authorities, so this should only be done with legal guidance. Now, if fixing past filings is too risky, the safest option would then be to simply start filing with an ITIN from now on and not use the false SSN anymore. Note that if taxes were paid correctly, the IRS generally only cares about collecting money, not immigration status. The SSA, however, may flag issues with falsely reported earnings. The safest approach is to consult a tax and immigration lawyer, switch to an ITIN, and only amend past returns if legally advisable.
Great. And one final thing. If people wanted to rise up against this, United States citizens specifically, I understand that in order to put things on the balance, you have to have certain signatures, or in order to have a lawsuit, you have to have certain advocacy people to help you out. What would be the top 3 places that people could contact, that could help to make a difference?
If United States citizens want to push for change on this issue, here are the top 3 actions they can take and the key contacts to reach out to. Number 1, contact your lawmakers. Begin with your U.S. senators and House representatives. Since Social Security and immigration policy are controlled at the federal level, writing to both senators and your district's representative is crucial. You can find their information at www.congress.gov/members. The House Judiciary Committee and the Senate Finance Committee oversee immigration and Social Security laws. Targeting committee members with letters and petitions increases the likelihood of policy discussions. Finally, state legislators and state governors would be a great place to begin as they have worker protection laws or tax policies that could be adjusted to help undocumented workers reclaim wages or contributions. Number 2, call advocacy organizations such as the National Immigration Law Center, NILC, which specializes in legal advocacy for immigrant workers, including tax and Social Security issues. Also, the American Civil Liberties Union, ACLU, can take on legal cases related to government overreach and workers' rights. And the Economic Policy Institute, EPI, provides research and advocacy on labor issues, including how undocumented workers contribute to Social Security. Number 3, find legal representation via the American Immigration Lawyers Association, AILA, specializing in immigration and worker rights lawsuits. Legal Aid at Work, which provides free or low-cost legal help for undocumented workers in employment disputes. And the Institute for Justice, which takes on cases where government policies exploit people financially. As a bonus, I highly recommend starting a petition. If enough people sign a petition, it can push Congress to take action. Websites like Change.org or We the People allow U.S. citizens to gather support and bring attention to the issue. If the goal is systemic change, a mix of political pressure, legal action, and grassroots activism will be the most effective strategy.
Wonderful. Now, if someone wanted to come clean, say there's a worker that has been working for 20 years, doing the right thing, but under a false Social Security number, or a falsely obtained Social Security number, but wanted to come clean and say, hey, yes, I am undocumented. Yes, I've been working. Yes, I've been paying my taxes. Yes, I've been a faithful citizen, or acting as one inch. What would you suggest that person do? What steps can they take to come clean and be able to get what they need in order to have everything done the right way?
Coming clean is a high-risk but potentially rewarding step, depending on the person's situation. If someone has worked under a false or borrowed Social Security number but has paid taxes, obeyed the law, and contributed to society, they may have options for legalizing their status. However, the path is not straightforward, and the risks must be carefully weighed. Here's what we recommend that they do. Consult an immigration attorney first. Before making any declarations to the government or employers, the person must speak with an immigration attorney. Some key organizations that provide legal help are the American Immigration Lawyers Association, AILA, the Immigrant Legal Resource Center, ILRC, and the National Immigration Law Center, NILC. An attorney will assess their risk level and see if there's a path to legal status. Possible paths may include family-based sponsorship, if they have U.S. citizen relatives, employment-based sponsorship, if their employer is willing to petition for them, and asylum or other humanitarian relief, if they qualify. Next, we recommend that they file taxes properly using an ITIN. As mentioned earlier, although many undocumented workers already file taxes using an individual taxpayer identification number, ITIN, many have not, and so for those whom haven't, they should apply for an ITIN through the IRS and start filing taxes under their correct identity to establish good faith compliance. The next step from there is voluntary disclosure to the Social Security Administration, SSA. Again, as we mentioned earlier, this comes with a lot of risk and should only be done after consulting with an attorney. If someone has used a false Social Security number, reporting it to the SSA will help end any future identity theft accusations, and may also allow them to correct earnings records under their real name and identifying number if they later obtain legal status. Remember, the SSA does not grant legal status, and coming forward could lead to job loss or even deportation if done carelessly. That's why legal advice is crucial. Finally, if they work for an employer who values them, they might be able to discuss options for sponsorship or assistance. Some industries, like agriculture and tech, actively lobby for legal protections for their workers. To summarize, coming forward is noble but risky. The safest way is to consult a trusted immigration lawyer first. Then, file taxes properly to establish good faith. And lastly, explore any available legal paths before disclosing status. If there's no immediate path, they may need to stay under the radar while pushing for immigration reform.
Great. Thank you so much for all of your help today. This is going to be very important as things move on, because people who are here, although they may be undocumented, they are doing the right thing and should be treated differently than people who are also here undocumented but are taking advantage of the system or doing criminal acts, etc. Many come here to work. Many are working jobs that nobody else really wants. They're not asking for any special favors. They're not the ones who determine what job to be accepted at. That's determined by the employer. They should not be punished for having a job, for example, being a waiter at a restaurant that could have been given to a documented citizen, but the employer chose to use this other person instead. It's not their fault that they were chosen. And so everything that we've discussed today is to help people who are wanting to do things the right way because they weren't necessarily told otherwise how to, or they weren't necessarily informed about what to do. They just followed along with what they were told to do by others.
You're absolutely right, and I appreciate the thoughtful and compassionate approach you're taking to this issue. There's a real distinction between undocumented individuals who are working hard, paying taxes, and contributing versus those who are exploiting the system or engaging in criminal activity. Many undocumented workers take jobs that are hard, often underpaid, and vital to industries like agriculture, construction, and hospitality. They're not asking for special treatment, just fairness. A big part of the problem is the lack of clear pathways for people who want to come clean and do things the right way. The system doesn't make it easy, and employers often take advantage of this legal gray area, leaving workers vulnerable. That's why discussions like this are important, so that people understand their options, minimize risks, and hopefully push for policies that recognize their contributions instead of punishing them unfairly. If you or others are looking for ways to advocate for these workers, connecting with immigrant rights organizations, legal aid groups, and political representatives can help push for reforms that offer a fair, realistic way forward.
Thank you for joining us today, and for your time and dedication to this issue.
Thank you for having me and for discussing such an important topic of concern.